Today we're going to get a sneak peek at an upcoming Bug Bucks course that's going to be dropped within the next few months. It's a comprehensive and detailed course on the ins and outs of retention. Wants, interests, and needs, we abbreviate these as WINs when it comes to working with customers. So in the sales process, after you've gotten their information, you've talked about what the situation is, you want to dig a little bit deeper and figure out what the connection there is to them. You know, is it having a clean home? Is it having protection from potentially dangerous insects? Welcome to the Bug Bucks podcast, a podcast designed to help you become a bug money millionaire. Today's episode is brought to you by Bug Bucks Plus, the #1 course designed to help you start and grow your pest control company. I am your host, Eric Bassett. Alan is traveling today, so this is going to be another Eric deep dive solo episode. Before we dive into our main topic for today, I just want to remind everybody listening, the best way to receive new episodes is by subscribing to our show on your preferred podcast platform like Apple, Google, Audible, or Spotify. If you love the show, please leave us a rating and a review. And one last reminder, if you haven't joined our Facebook group, go to Bug Bucks, that is BUGBUX. We've got over 3,500 other pest control owners in that group waiting to connect with you and share their thoughts. That's also the best way for you to share your feedback on our show and have your questions highlighted and discussed here on the podcast. Also, at the time that I'm recording this episode, that Facebook group has been growing like crazy. So I just want to say thank you to everybody for sharing the group and supporting us. Today we're going to get a sneak peek at an upcoming Bug Bucks course that's going to be dropped within the next few months. It's a comprehensive and detailed course on the ins and outs of retention, which will walk you through everything you need to know about saving customers. I've got the course outline right here in front of me, and I'm going to walk through it with you and give you the overview and some of my thoughts. Because there's quite a bit to effectively managing attrition, I'm going to actually split this into 2 different episodes, so it's a little bit easier to digest, and this is going to be delivered in a really loose and almost more brainstorming type of a format. Now, the first time that most companies really start focusing on retention is usually at the tail end of the customer experience when they're actually requesting to cancel their service. Realistically, most cancellation situations don't actually result from a single bad experience and are actually an accumulation of less than ideal experiences combined with some event that triggers the desire to cancel. Now, if you want to fight the attrition battle effectively, you've got to go all the way back to the beginning of the customer experience and ensure that retention efforts are baked into everything that you do every step of the way. Here's my list of what those are in chronological order from the beginning to the end. There are actually 10 separate categories that I'm going to be diving into, but on this episode, we're only going to be covering the first 5 and then the last 5 on the next episode. So here we go. Now I'm looking at my outline here and I've got these 10 categories. Number 1 is going to be initial impressions. Now I want you guys to think we're going all the way back to the very beginning of the customer experience. This is when they're probably Googling pest control companies, or maybe they saw your van or truck driving around. So when we talk about initial impressions, I want you to think about how your brand is represented to them. The reason why this is important from a retention standpoint is because you don't want that customer to have any doubts about you in the beginning. And you might be wondering, that seems odd for them to have any doubts. We haven't even had any kind of service or relationship yet. But if you think about other companies, other service-related industries, if you look at a brand right off the bat, within 5-10 seconds, you have some gauge of how confident you are in their abilities just by looking at them. And that's the same type of judgment that these customers are making to our companies and our brands. So things like your website, your Google listing, the reviews that you have on your Google listing, right? And the ease of access that they have as far as connecting with you. So let's dive into some of those. If somebody's on my website, I want to make sure that the pictures that they see are how I want to connect with them. I want them to see good, effective technicians placing bait stations, doing treatments around homes that target the types of houses that my customers are likely to have. right? I want to make sure that all of that lines up. My website is clean, it's fresh, it's easy to go through, it doesn't seem complicated, right? Again, we're trying to limit doubts, any initial doubts that customer's going to have. The thing with the Google listing usually has to do with how complete the listing is, if it has some photos, if it has some videos, if it has really easy contact information. If it looks incomplete or if it looks really, really young, that could be an issue. Again, you want to make sure that you're delivering confidence for your customers here. Reviews are a great way to do this. Nothing better than being able to have other people tell your potential customer that this is the right company to choose, right? That builds a lot of confidence. And then the ease of access for them to get a hold of you. Now, with most Google profiles, it's pretty much required you have some type of contact info on there, whether it's a phone number, messaging website, whatever that is. But regardless of what platform we're talking about, whether it's Google or Facebook or Instagram, whatever, you want to make sure that you have a really simple way for them to get a hold of you. It really degrades a customer's confidence in that new company if they try to call you and you don't answer, or it's somehow complicated and they can't get a hold of you. It's just not a good idea, right? So you're probably listening to this and thinking, man, Eric, this seems pretty obvious, which it is, but it's got to be in there. And some people are missing out on some of these key components. And if you're missing out on this from the very beginning, you're going to be creating doubts in your customer's experience of you from the get-go. And then at the end of the experience, if they think, man, I think I'm going to skip out of here, I'm going to cut ties with whatever this company is, all of the roots that they have built in their experience with you, anything that's bad is going to come to the surface, and they're going to think to themselves, I knew I shouldn't have chose that company. From the very beginning, I just had this gut feeling it probably wasn't going to work out. And now that X, Y, and Z has happened, this makes so much sense. I think I'm out of here, right? So we want to avoid those initial issues. And as we go through this list, it's all about avoiding those issues over the entire course of the customer's experience with you. So again, initial impressions, that's kind of my first one here. I've got the website, Google listing, reviews, ease of access, right? This also will end up diving into how your technicians look when they show up to the service, but we're going to cover that in a little bit of a different subject here. So let's talk about the sales process. That's kind of the next step in the customer journey here. So your customer has found you on Google or wherever they found you, referral, doesn't matter what the source is. And now they actually want to contact you and they're interested. They're a lead, right? They want to buy something from you. And maybe they came into your storefront, which is very, very rare. But most likely they either called your phone and they're talking to somebody on the phone right now. And when they dial that number, the response time is going to have an effect on that customer's experience. So for anybody who's listening out here, if you don't have a very dedicated way to make sure you pick up the phone when somebody's interested in buying your service, make sure that you fix that problem. Because if they have to wait 4 or 5 minutes or 10 minutes, or they have to wait for a call back to even sign up for service, what does that tell them about your willingness to answer the phone when they have a legitimate issue or an emergency that needs to get solved? So just keep that in mind. The response time is going to be a big thing. So you're on the phone with this customer and your salesperson is talking to them. Now, maybe they're on the phone, maybe they're out in the field. I know that there are some companies who take inbound leads and then send out salesmen to go close those leads, or technicians. That's totally fine. Regardless of what the format is when you're with your sales process, what I want you guys to focus on is the quality of the communication when it comes to working with that customer. Now, I don't just mean being nice or being professional. What I'm talking about is having a very streamlined way of getting the information that you want to them and making sure that you get the information that you need from them to effectively give them what they're looking for. So if you have a communication process that you teach your inside sales team or your technicians or whoever it is that's going to be working with these potential customers, that communication process needs to be thorough. and it needs to be effective. It needs to be clear, and that way all the expectations are in there. So we'll dive a little bit more into the sales process later on. You guys have probably heard that in some of my other courses and some of the other podcasts, so we'll talk about it a little bit later. But one thing that I really want to touch on when it comes to how this affects retention is making sure that you uncover a customer's wants, interests, and needs. And I mean more than just ants, or more than just spiders, or more than just, hey, like that we have rats, or we have mice, or we're concerned about our crawl space. It's deeper than that. It's more about value and affordability and punctuality and, local, which is something that people value, right? Is it a local company that they can support? You want to find the things that they see value in, and you want to be able to connect your service to those things. The way that affects retention long term is because the more that your customer can connect their value with what you provide, the less chance they are of disconnecting that value later on, right? And I'm sure you guys have probably experienced this with other vendors that you use already, where something bad happens or they are kind of delivering a subpar experience. But because they've been able to check off multiple boxes of what you see value in, you'll hang on to that vendor for an extended period of time. But if you really only have one checkbox and that's all they're providing for you, man, that's going to be a really, really tough sell when it comes to something bad happening and then you having to actually save that customer. So wants, interests, and needs, we abbreviate these as WINs when it comes to working with customers. So in the sales process, after you've gotten their information, you've talked about what the situation is, you want to dig a little bit deeper and figure out what the connection there is to them. Is it having a clean home? Is it having protection from potentially dangerous insects? Does that protection have to do with their wife or their husband or their kids or their pets? Dig deeper, right? That's the idea there. The last part about the sales process, and this is a very, very big one, I've seen this completely destroy customer experiences, is expectations. Every single technician who's probably listening to this has some experience where they've gone out to a customer's home, do an initial service, and the expectations that the customer has are all messed up, and the salesperson who sold it probably gets the blame. Realistically, I mean, if we're being honest here, most sales guys tend to, I don't want to say mislead customers because that's not entirely accurate, but I think there's a lot of times that what they'll end up doing is giving the customer the wrong expectation in order to deliver value. So for example, if a customer says, hey, would you guys mind sweeping down all the cobwebs in my crawl space? And the salesman says, sure, that's not a problem. We can definitely do that. And then the technician gets out there and he's thinking, there's no way. I'm not taking a bee pole down into this crawl space to sweep down all these cobwebs. Are you joking? Right? And now he has to tell the customer that that's not really an appropriate expectation. And now they're mad. And again, that's going to be strike one in the experience for this customer. So expectations are going to be a big thing. We're going to dive a little bit more into the ins and outs of that during the Bug Bucks course, but there's some really simple ones here that I just want to cover before I move on. Things like appointment time windows. This was a big one that I had with my inside sales team. If you tell a customer an appointment window and you say, for example, hey, I'm going to have my technician out there between 10 a.m. and noon. Does that customer understand that that's an arrival time, as in the technician could be there as early as 10 a.m. or as late as noon? Or does that customer expect that the technician is going to show up at 10 a.m. and be there until noon? Because to us, we probably think that that's an arrival window. That's a pretty typical thing for pest control professionals. But for customers, who knows what they expect that means? And if you're leaving that up to chance, then you're opening the door for a bad situation, at least the chance of a bad situation. So make sure when it comes to expectations, whether that's payment, whether that's appointment, whether that's how the products work, make sure that you're meeting or I should say, sharing with the customer the appropriate expectations. So let's switch gears a little bit. Let's actually talk about the initial service itself and what parts of that are going to contribute to the customer's experience and ultimately either contribute to the customer canceling or the customer sticking around long term. So I want to talk about the initial impressions that the technician's going to give off when they first knock on the door, right? And I want you guys to imagine if a service professional comes to your house, let's say it's HVAC or it's plumbing or it's roofing or insulation, paint, you name it. You name whatever this service industry is, right? This technician comes up to your house, he knocks on your door, you open the door. What do you expect, right? Now, some of our technicians are a little bit on the young side, which is sometimes a little bit difficult, okay, because our average customer age is probably somewhere, around the late 30s, early 40s age range. So especially if it's a younger technician, that might be a little bit difficult. But, young technicians can definitely seem and sound a lot more confident if they're trained properly. But if the service professional comes up to your door and you open the door, you expect them to be well-dressed, sharp, clean. I'm not saying that their face needs to be shaved, but I am saying that it probably needs to be clean cut, right? Nice and crisp. They need to be able to make direct eye contact. They need to be able to speak clearly and confidently. And then more importantly is they need to be able to communicate what they're going to do, where they're going to do it, and why. And with communication, I know that this sounds like such a painfully obvious thing, but you'd be surprised how many situations I've noticed where a technician knocks on a customer's door and says, "Hey, my name's John. I'm just here to do your service." And that's it. And the customer says, "Okay, yeah, gate's on the left-hand side, and let me know if you need anything," right? And then the technician leaves. And that's the only communication that's there, right? Now, for some technicians, maybe that's enough. But you have to keep in mind that the communication with your customer is really the foundation. And when it comes to this initial service, this is the first time they've seen a technician, most likely. This is really going to tell them everything they need to know about what their experience is going to be like going forward. So if that technician can't communicate effectively with them, then it's probably going to lead to a cancellation later on. So really what we're looking for here, again, technician knocks on the door, introduces himself, and talks about a little bit about the company, and then looks over maybe the initial work order and tells the customer what he's going to be doing, how he's going to be doing it, and why. And then maybe any logistical points that have to go with it. So for example, if I'm going to knock on a customer's door, knock, 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 customer answers, and I say, "Hey, my name's Eric. I'm with Natura Pest Control. I'm going to be your service technician for today. Just looking over your service invoice here, it appears like you've been having an issue with ants inside the kitchen. Does that sound right?" The customer says, "Yes." And I say, "Perfect. Okay, I'll make sure that I get that taken care of. That's not going to be a problem. Have you noticed any other pest activity around the outside of the house? Or what other pest activity have you noticed?" Now, if they say anything, great. I got a mental note of what I'm taking care of. If they don't say anything, I'm going to say, "Not a worry. I'm going to go ahead and do a proactive treatment around the full house anyway. Make sure we keep you guys fully protected. I'm going to go ahead and do that service on the inside of the house first for the ants. I'm going to walk you through how I'm going to do that and some important things you're going to need to know. And if you have any questions, you just let me know." Does that sound like a plan? Customer's going to say yes, and we get rocking and rolling, right? Now, that kind of communication to a customer tells them, one, I am confident in my skills and abilities. Two, I'm a clear communicator, so they have nothing to worry about. There's not going to be any misunderstandings, right? They know exactly what I'm going to do. They know where I'm going to do it, and they know why I'm going to be doing it. Now, you might think, why does my technician really have to double check if my sales team can really do all the double checking for him? And in a perfect world, maybe that is how it works, right? But this is not a perfect world, and communication for your technicians is going to be much more important. And especially over the long term, the way that your customers experience your technicians over and over and over again at each quarterly or every other month service, that's going to be a huge impact on whether or not they decide to cancel their service or not. So moving on a little bit, let's talk about service protocols. And this is a much bigger thing than just communication or just one technician, but maybe kind of more of a company philosophy on what products you're going to be using, where you're going to be using them, how they're used, right? And then your other IPM strategies, right? Are we talking about chemical control, mechanical control, biological, cultural control? What are our philosophies when it comes to handling pest issues? Because that's ultimately going to result in whether or not we can really remediate a pest issue for a customer. And if we're struggling to actually get the results that we want, and that struggle is because the technician who did that service didn't use the right product, or didn't apply that product in the right way, or didn't apply that product in the right locations, or didn't let the customer know what they should or shouldn't do in regard to the technician applying that product. I mean, the list goes on here when it comes to service protocols. And again, we kind of just assume that, we all use the same kinds of products, we all apply them in the same kinds of ways. But realistically, that is so far from the truth. I've worked with a few different pest control companies. I've done consulting work for a lot of pest control companies, and everybody's just a little bit different. We all have the same general idea of how these products work, but sometimes it's a night and day difference with what philosophies that pest control companies usually follow. So I'm not saying that there's one perfect way to do it, but I am saying that there are some proven philosophies when it comes to doing the treatment properly or getting the best results from a treatment. We actually just dropped a BugBucks Plus course about dialing in your service, and Jake Klaus delivers some phenomenal information. So if you guys have more questions about services and actually locking in what products you're using and how you're using them, just a plug for BugBucks Plus here, that's a fantastic course. So we're going to move on a little bit from service protocols, and we're just going to talk about customer expectations. Now, I think most technicians, when you do a service, especially an initial service, you probably have a little bit of a checklist, whether it's a mental checklist or an actual physical checklist that you go through with your customer, where you tell them what they should expect, and then maybe some logistical how-tos, right? So, if I just did an interior treatment for a customer, I'm probably going to let them know, hey, it's really helpful if when you're cleaning the floor or you're cleaning the counters, that you can kind of try to avoid those areas that I've put down product. The reason why is because the products or the chemicals that are in your cleaning agents are pretty harsh, and they're going to react to the products I use, and they're going to make them very ineffective, which is true. You think that Dawn dish soap is pretty gentle on hands, which is true. But if I put down some type of product inside of a house on a countertop, and then that customer wipes it down again, that product is more than less gone. So letting your customer understand some of those kind of expectations is smart. When it comes to pest activity, that's a huge expectation. And depending on if you guys have warranties, then that'll be a big thing that you have to consider. So if a customer has ants, and I do a full initial service for ants, let's say odorous house ants, and we're talking, interior treatments, we're talking maybe wall void treatments. I've got bait that I've probably applied in some key specific areas. Maybe I've done an exterior treatment. I've done a granule treatment around the outside of the house. I have all these different areas, and they should work very, very well, right? Should be very effective. If the customer thinks that the ants are just going to disappear overnight, then that's my fault for setting that expectation. When really what I should be saying, number one, is that pest control is a process, not an event. That's first and foremost. Thing number two here is that process takes some time. So what I usually end up communicating to my customers is that, hey, if it's been 7 to 10 days and you're really not seeing a reduction in activity, call me. I'll be happy to come back out, take a peek, evaluate, see what I can do to make sure that we get this taken care of, and we'll go from there. But if it's been, earlier than 7 to 10 days, be patient, right? Do me a favor, be patient, let the product do what it's supposed to, and let's see what we can do as far as mitigating, the overuse of some of these products, right? It doesn't do us any good to just apply product right on top of where it's already applied within a week, I promise, right? So expectations when it comes to what the products are going to do and what the pest activity is going to result in with customers is going to be huge. Let's talk about post-service care. This probably seems kind of odd, but after an initial service is done, there are some additional steps that you guys can take when it comes to ensuring the best customer experience. And again, here, we're really trying to make sure that number one, there aren't any strikes against us during the customer experience. But number two, we're trying to really drive value so that if any of those negative experiences happen, it's offset by the value that they see in our service. So, as the new customers that we bring on over at Natura, one thing that we've been doing is that we send all of our new customers right after they receive an initial service, we send them a new customer letter. And the new customer letter just kind of helps them get to know our company. And it helps get them on the same page about some of those expectations we talked about before. But really what it does is it helps them buy into our company vision and values. So, for example, on our new customer letter, it's got our logo on it. First paragraph talks about our company mission. It has a couple of photos of my family and my business partner's family. That way they can kind of connect with us personally, which is great. Then down below that photo, it actually gives them a little bit of a warning when it comes to door-to-door sales guys and other companies that might tell some half-truths when it actually comes to what we do or what licensing we have, etc. Then it also shares a little bit of information about our licensing, our credentials, and then some different options when it comes to their warranty and how to contact us and all those things. So right off the bat, we want to make sure that the customer has that in their hand within, just a few days of them receiving their initial service. And it doesn't have to be a physical letter. It can be an email, so you don't have to waste any money necessarily sending that out. You just have to make sure you have a dedicated process to actually sending that out to customers. The next thing that I want to kind of highlight a little bit is engaging content that your customer can see or hear or feel if it's actually physical. So, one of the best ways to ensure that your customer doesn't get lured away from some other company, other than some of these other things we've talked about, is if they're able to see and experience you and your brand in positive ways more than just when your technician's there, right? So if they're able to see you on social media, if they're able to see you on email blasts, right? Maybe you have some kind of a newsletter, which could be really handy, when you actually talk about pro tips on how they can keep their home relatively pest-free and reduce conducive conditions, right? That would be pretty smart. But what you want to do is make sure that you are allowing them to experience your brand in a positive way over and over and over again, more often than you having to send a technician out there. So whether that's an email, some kind of physical newsletter, engaging content on social media, or anything like that, anything that has your brand in it is going to be important. And as long as it obviously engages them in a positive way. So let's dive into the last section for this episode. We're going to talk a little bit about customer service. And some of this stuff we've really already covered already, so I'm going to kind of zip through as much of this as I can. When your customer calls into your office and they have, maybe it's an issue, maybe it's a billing issue, maybe it's pest activity, maybe they just want to ask a question about something logistically, it doesn't really matter. When they call in or they email in or they message you on Instagram or Facebook or whatever the format is where they actually try to contact you, the response time is so crucial here. And I can't stress this enough. We talked about this with the sales process too. The best thing is that if you can answer that phone within just a couple rings. If the customer dials your number, rings once, rings twice, and a live person picks up the phone and says, Natura Pest Control, this is Eric. How can I help you? That's money. And by money, I mean that's a customer who's going to stay with you long term. Why? Because that communicates that you have somebody there waiting to take their call whenever they have an issue. And that's the type of company that people want to stick around with. If they have to wait, 3, 4, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, if they have to leave a message and then wait another 30, 60, 90 minutes for you to call them back, it just slowly kind of chips away at how they feel about your company, the confidence that they have in your company. Now, that's not probably going to make or break the relationship for them, but it could. At least it does for me. If I call a customer service department for any vendor that I have and nobody answers, or I have to leave a message and then nobody calls me back, I don't think I can deal with that. Life's too short to have to wait, more than a day or two to get a hold of somebody. And if I can find a company who will answer the phone after a few rings and respond to me immediately, that's the company that I'm going to be sticking with for the long term. So availability, response time, that's going to be huge. The next thing is just the overall experience when it comes to the customer calling in, right? Now, I think everybody can probably assume that you want to have a good customer experience when they call in, and that's obvious. But what I'm talking about here is how professional and how solution-oriented your customer service team is, and how slow to anger and frustration they are with customers. These customers if they call in and they're mad about something, the last thing they need is some person on the other end of the phone who's going to throw it right back at them, right? You want to teach your team how to acknowledge and how to actually handle those kinds of situations, right? And when it comes to that, obviously that's going to be a big part of communication. We talked about that before, having a communication process that you teach your team. That way they understand what's going on. And then expectations when it comes to what they're going to be doing for that customer. So for example, we talked about this before. If a customer calls in, sets up an appointment, we're talking about arrival time. We're talking about maybe what their expectations are as far as what the products are going to be doing, how long they take to get working, and what kind of pest activity they're going to notice. That's something that your customer service team really needs to make sure that they communicate. That's a very easy way to upset a customer is they call in because they're seeing pest activity, and right away they think, oh man, is this working? Maybe, maybe not. So they call the pest control company and they get somebody on the phone who says, hey, so sorry to hear that. Mother Nature is a difficult thing. We'd be happy to come out there and get that taken care of for you. Okay. Confidence is back up, right? Things are going well. And then we tell them something like, that's not a problem. The technician will be out there. We'll treat for the spiders and then they'll be magically gone forever. Or we'll treat for the ants and then by the next day, those ants will disappear. Even if we don't say that, if the customer is thinking that, we're going to have a problem here. So we need to make sure that we actually communicate, hey, after the technician's gone, it's probably going to take about 7 to 10 days for you to really see a good decrease in activity. Now, if it's before 7 to 10 days and you're still noticing activity, please be patient, right? If it's after 7 to 10 days and you're noticing activity and it hasn't really seemed like it's resolved or gotten any better, please call back, right? Nothing kills a relationship quicker than having to schedule a reservice and then getting a reservice done and then not having proper expectations and then that customer calling back 2 or 3 days later really, really mad that it's still an issue just for someone to say, oh, well, those expectations are unrealistic, right? That's not going to make for a happy customer. And then the last thing I have here for customer service is just execution. Now, this is more of an internal thing. This has to do with how well you're able to actually execute on what you're offering. So if you tell a customer, hey, my technician would be happy to come out there and get that done. Maybe we messed up on a service before and we're trying to resolve an issue, whatever that situation is. We need to make sure that that customer service team puts effective notes on that work order so the technician knows exactly what he's doing and exactly what he's getting himself into. Because if there's a lot more going on than just ants in the kitchen, and ants in the kitchen is the only note that goes on that work order, then we're going to be running into issues when the technician goes out there and realizes that not only are there ants in the kitchen, but there's an issue with the rodent bait stations out on the back patio, or there's a problem with the attic, or there's also spiders in the basement, whatever the situation is, right? We need to make sure that we have thorough notes and we're executing on what the customer is actually wanting. All right, guys, that is the first 5 tips when it comes to retention. I'm going to be dropping the next 5 tips in the following episode. I appreciate you all joining in to listen. Now, if you got a business partner, a manager, a friend, or just someone you know who would benefit from a better understanding of how to save customers and prevent cancellations, please share this episode. One last reminder, if you haven't already, please join our BugBucks Facebook group. That's BUGBUX. And of course, this episode is brought to you by BugBucks Plus, the #1 course designed to help you start and grow your pest control company. Make sure you check it out at bugbucksplus.com. And until the next episode, keep building those pest control companies.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please show your support by subscribing and leaving us a 5-star rating. Thank you, and we'll catch you on next week's episode.